Welcome to the Trending Topics live show. My name is Jakob Steinschaden and I'm honored to have a very special guest today in our studio. He's one of the first investors of Facebook and today he's also one of the biggest critics of the social network. Give it up for Roger McNamee. Roger, welcome to Vienna. You just flew over from the States.
No, actually, I came here from Copenhagen.
Okay.
I've been going around Europe for 3 weeks on the European part of my book tour, and so I'm just so excited to be here because I have a lot of family here in Vienna, and I have not been before. It's my first visit.
All right, great. So we will talk about your new book later, but first I would like to know, so you are one of the first investors of Facebook. So back then you had a company called Elevation Partners, and in I think 2010 you spent like 80 million, 90 million dollars to invest in Facebook. Give us a short overview. Why did you invest in Facebook?
So
back
I
then?
first met Mark Zuckerberg in 2006 when he was 22 years old, and I helped him to solve a crisis in his business where essentially the company was going to be sold over his objection. And I helped him solve the crisis, and he asked me to be an advisor, which I was through 2009. The first opportunity to invest came in 2007, and then Elevation made its big investment in 2008. And the goal at that time was very simple. Mark had two advantages that previous social networks had not had. He required authenticated identity in the form of an email account from a university or school and then later a business. And then secondly, he gave the user control of privacy. And I thought those two changes were extraordinary. And when I met Mark, he was a really compelling entrepreneur. But because his management team had wanted to sell the company to Yahoo, that was the situation that was going on when I met him. He needed to rebuild a team. And the big thing I did for him was to introduce him to Sheryl Sandberg and help to bring her into Facebook. And the two of them obviously got along great. I was, as you can imagine, that made me very proud of my association with the company. And it took some years before I recognized that things were not the way they had been, that trouble had happened. And as a professional analyst, it makes me angry at myself that I didn't see it sooner. And that may be, in some ways, the driver of my activism in that it took me too long to see it, so I have to work harder to make other people see it.
So basically you convinced Mark Zuckerberg to not sell the company?
No, he didn't want to sell it. I gave him the mechanism. I showed him what to do to keep the company from being sold.
All right. So this year you published a book called Sucked, and it's very critical. Tell us a little bit what's in the book. What is your criticism?
My basic concern was that the business model, algorithms, and culture of Facebook were enabling bad people to harm innocent people. Initially, I saw it in civil rights in the United States and in democracy, essentially elections in the United Kingdom and the United States. In time, I met Tristan Harris, who had been a design ethicist at Google. Tristan helped me understand in much greater detail the addictive properties of smartphones, and especially how you can use that capability in an internet platform like Facebook, Google, Microsoft, or Amazon to create first habits, then addictions, and then once addicted, to manipulate the time and attention of users, and then later to manipulate their behavior. And Tristan and I set out to share this with first the tech industry, which wasn't interested, and then with policymakers in Washington, D.C. who were. And so we worked very closely with legislators in Washington, first to create hearings about this, and then as things started to get rolling, to begin to broaden that understanding into the press and into the public to try to bring it about. Today, our understanding is there are really 4 areas of harm. Public health. Think of that as habits, addictions, but also it's filter bubbles, it's brain hacking, it's all the things that persuasive technology can do on a smartphone to isolate people, to manipulate them. Secondly, we were very concerned about the impact on democracy, that Facebook, Google, and Microsoft dominate the public square in every country in which they operate. And they do so without consideration for the needs of the population, so they're not responsible about it. The third issue is privacy. Really, the ability to make choices in your life without fear, to actually have control, to have self-determination, that these companies are using our trust in their news feeds and in their search results to manipulate our choices and ultimately our behavior. And then lastly, I was deeply troubled by the impact on competition. They are monopolists, and as such, they are preventing entrepreneurs all around the world from having access to markets and to bring great innovations to the world as a whole. They're also stifling the development of alternative business models. So that was where I was. And then most recently, I met a professor at Harvard by the name of Shoshana Zuboff. She wrote a book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And I am a true believer in Shoshana's work and encourage everyone to read it, because this is an idea developed at Google, perfected at Google, imitated by Facebook and then Amazon and Microsoft, where you're essentially converting all human experience into data, using that data to reconstruct people's entire lives in digital form as a data voodoo doll, and then using that first to make behavioral predictions, but also to manipulate the choices and behavior of the people who use your products.
So there are a lot of problems and there are a lot of discussions about it. What would be a solution to the problems big tech is doing? So should they be broken up?
These are really good questions, Jakob. In my opinion, personal data should be treated as a human right, not an asset. It shouldn't be subject to commerce of any kind. That Professor Zuboff makes the point that in many ways, the collection of personal data happened quietly and slowly without any fear or consideration. But then the debate is like the debate that took place 120 years ago about child labor. In 1900 in the United States, the debate was whether a 10-year-old should work 5 hours a day or 8 hours a day. And eventually somebody comes in and says the right number was 0. And that's what Shoshana would say about personal data. There should be no commerce in it. And it's not just that corporations shouldn't, but you shouldn't either, because the impact increasingly is felt by other people. And so you shouldn't have your right to sell your data if it harms other people. It would be like selling your kidneys. We do not allow that. Now, if we can end the practice of commercializing people's most intimate financial, health, wellness, location, browser history data, their emails, their documents, then we have a chance to eliminate the problems for public health, the threat to democracy, and the threat to privacy, because all of those are related to the micro-targeting, related to all of this data and their ability to control our choices. Now, there's one other issue. All these people here are entrepreneurs. Today, they have no access to the market because monopolists block them. So we also need to use antitrust law to create space for startups to happen. In addition, I want governments to recognize that this technology is so strategic that it's far more important than a lot of other things governments do today. And I want to see governments paying a subsidy to create technology products of this type without the horrible business model of surveillance capitalism. And my ideal would be in the United States if the government of the United States offered $1 billion to the first company that got 100 million users on a social network that didn't have surveillance capitalism as its business model. And I think that would be a very exciting thing to see. And it makes more sense than what the government does now, which is to subsidize oil exploration and the production of sugar.
So basically more money for startups, more state money.
Well, I think that we need more money of some kind. But I think the state money, I would use it again as a prize. I would make it an incentive. So I'd let the market work. But by creating the prize at the end of the rainbow, the cost of capital goes way down. I would use antitrust law, though, to make it possible for startups to do on these platforms what the U.S. government allowed to happen to our telephone monopoly, where first the companies were restricted to a smaller space than they operated in. Then secondly, their intellectual property was made available for free license to startups. That's what created Silicon Valley, because AT&T had the transistor. And then thirdly, the infrastructure was made available so startups could compete using the infrastructure of the monopolist. And I think I would really like a situation where startups who want to compete with Facebook but who have a constructive business model get free advertising to build, say, their first 100 million users.
So Mark Zuckerberg, I think this year said that privacy is the future. Do you think, is it possible for him, for the company, to turn away from the advertising business model, or are they stuck in it and can't get out of it?
So I think it is definitely possible, but I don't think it will happen, and I don't think the privacy initiative has anything to do with that. I believe that Mark wants end-to-end encryption because he is guilty of amplifying hate speech, disinformation, and conspiracy theories. Sorry, not he is. The algorithms do that because the algorithms are tuned to maximize engagement, and things that scare or outrage people do that better than anything, and that would be hate speech, disinformation, conspiracy theories. And so that kind of content creates legal liability. If he has end-to-end encryption, he can legitimately say, oh, I have no idea what's hate speech, right? So all he's trying to do is to get rid of liability. And when he says he wants to see global data protection regulation implemented globally, I mean, they have taken advantage of the lenient enforcement of GDPR. You know, Facebook and Google were both allowed to create the dialog box that users use. And their thing said, your choice is to give up the things you love about these products. And people said, no, I don't want that. So 95% or so of the people said, no change. If the European Union had been thoughtful, it would have created its own dialog box. And the dialog box would have said something like, this company has collected all of the digital data about you that exists on Earth. They know everything about your financial behavior. They know how much money you earn. They know where you spend it. They know everything there is to know about your health and wellness. They know everything about your location. They've tracked you relentlessly online and know every single thing you've done online. If they are Google or Microsoft, they've scanned all your emails and all your documents, so they know everything you're doing professionally and personally. They may have, as Amazon, Facebook, and Google have, products that listen to you. Now, they have been manipulating your choices, and they're trying to manipulate your behavior. Would you like the government to protect you? I think that dialog box would have produced a really different outcome, and that dialog box would have been factually correct. And so when Mark says, I want to extend GDPR globally, what he's really saying is, I like GDPR because I figured out how to fake it out. I don't have to comply with it. And so at the end of the day, I think Mark has learned to be a politician. And I think Facebook's public relations has done a masterful job of stretching every issue out past the attention period of the press and policymakers. And so they're still winning, which is why the challenge that people like me face is still huge.
Do you think Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, will get away with it, or will there be a point in time when they have to sell Instagram, have to sell WhatsApp?
Well, I think those are two different questions. Right now, he's definitely getting away with it. He went to Washington, D.C. last week and met with a lot of policymakers. And there are many people in Congress who are very angry at Mark. But it turns out there's some people who think what he's doing is just fine. So it was an incredibly successful trip. And Mark's learned how to do politics. And I'm not surprised. He's really bright. And I liked him, so I'm not surprised other people like him too. But what they're doing, in my mind, should scare everybody. That surveillance capitalism, as described by Professor Zuboff, is as different from the capitalism that we all would like to see as Soviet communism was. It's a different way of looking at the world. It's a world that values efficiency above everything else. It's a world where they're not conscious of the fact that efficiency or efficiency is about eliminating friction. The problem is that friction is at the heart of almost everything we love. You can't have creativity. You can't have art. You can't have music. You can't have expertise. You can't have procreation without friction. And so if you eliminate all friction, what do? You eliminate personal choice and you undermine democracy, because democracy and personal choice are really inefficient. And so I just think we need to have a conversation about that. And so I always say to people, you don't have to believe me, but just imagine, for the purpose of the conversation, that we're engaged in a thought experiment, that these are issues I'm laying out, many of which you don't know about. And if what I say is true, what would you do differently? What will you wish you did in 5 years, right? Because these guys, their business plans are evolving. I mean, Google is doing a smart cities project, which is looking to effectively replace democratically elected governments with algorithms. That'll be really efficient, but if you're a citizen in that place, you lose a lot of personal autonomy. And Facebook's looking to create a cryptocurrency which would underline states, right? And so do we believe in sovereign states? Maybe we do, maybe we don't, but we ought to have a debate before we accept a corporation doing that. And that's really what we're up against. And again, I don't think these are bad people. They just believe in different things. And the people who use the products, for the most part, aren't conscious of what they're doing.
Do you use Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, or did you?
I use Facebook and Instagram because I've written a book targeted at people who use Facebook and Instagram, and they have a monopoly. There's no other way for me to reach those people. So this is part of the problem. I don't ask people to give up using these products because that's not realistic. You have to live your life. And they are monopolists. And so, but what I have done is I gave up Google for Lent 3 years ago. And I still have to, because I'm a musician, I still have to sometimes use YouTube. But I don't use Google search engine. I don't use Gmail, Google Docs, Google Maps. And my life is much better as a consequence.
Really?
Oh, much better. Because I accept a little bit of a little bit less convenience in exchange for much more autonomy. And it makes me really happy. I made it into a game. I treat it like Frogger. I'm the frog. Google's the river. The logs are the various other products I use. And the set of products is getting much, much better. And thanks to Apple, right, with iPhones and iOS, there is a really great alternative for protecting your privacy. And the advantage that Apple offers users today are so huge and getting bigger every day. And I just think that everyone should pause and think about what they're giving up for these tiny increments of convenience. When you put in Alexa in your kitchen, they're listening all the time. You put it in your bedroom, nothing good can come from that. And a lot of bad things can come from it.
So you have been an investor. Do you still invest in startups or?
No, I'm full-time. I've been a full-time activist for the last 3 years. And so I'm not currently investing. I hope I will someday, because I think the next big thing is about a return to the old values of Silicon Valley, of empowering the people who use technology. And that there is a version of every product you see today that can be done with a better business model. But there are also millions of products that aren't being done because they don't fit the business model of these monopolists. Let me give you an example. Have you ever used CAPTCHA, that Google product that says, "Are you a robot?" and then they give you the pictures of the cars?
Yeah, I did.
People look at that and they go, "Why do I need to look at pictures of cars to figure out I'm not a robot?" And the answer is you don't. You're looking at the pictures of cars because you're training the AI for self-driving cars. But they figure out that you're a human from your mouse movement. And they're Google, so I presume they're keeping all of those records over time. Now, in a perfect world, a company that had your mouse movement history over time would be the first company to notice if you developed a neurological disorder like Parkinson's disease. And in a perfect world, they would treat you as the customer and call you up or send you a note and say, "Hey, there is a 30 or 50 or 70% chance that you have a neurological disorder. Here is a list of neurologists you could go and see, and we're going to protect your privacy and give you guidance. It might be a really, really good product, an insurance product. As things stand today, you are not Google's customer. You're not even Google's product. You're the fuel for their business model. Their customers are people willing to pay hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars for certainty. And so if they know with a 50% probability that you have Parkinson's disease, who's the big customer for that? In Europe, it's a pharmaceutical company. In the US, it's an insurance company. And the insurance company will either terminate the coverage or raise the rates without telling the consumer. Why? Because then it's a pre-existing condition and they have to cover it without raising rates. And so you've set up all these perverse incentives, and no one's going to get to create that insurance product because Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft, they have at least half of all the AI professionals in North America. And almost all of them are working on behavioral manipulation. There's no time or energy for anything else, and they pay them so well that the cost of doing a startup using AI is more or less prohibitive. So none of these things are getting done. And to me, that's too bad. I just think I think technology is a beautiful thing when it's created by people who have a conscience and a soul.
What kind of new startups would you like to see?
Well, I'd like to see that neurological product. So to be clear, I think if you look at Apple's model, right now the most important thing a startup can do is things that protect privacy. There's clearly a market for that. So I'm a big fan of DuckDuckGo and Disconnect Me, and I think there's still a ton of things there around that. I think there are opportunities about creating privacy in spaces that didn't have it. So Apple has a new credit card designed to prevent data leaking out of there. So it's really about protecting your privacy is, I think, the thing today. And I think that evolves. I really want to see a significant investment in creating a new architecture for identity, distributed identity, and distributed resources around it. So I think that clouds that are at least virtually distributed, if not physically distributed, but distributed identity is a place where instead of every time I log on to a site, they strip all my data and plant trackers in me. They have to come make a request, and this thing sits in the middle and says, okay, here's the list of data this site needs in order to do business with you. Is that reasonable or not reasonable, right? Is there a way for me to spoof this thing so I don't give them real information, right? I think that is I think that's actually an operating system. I think if a distributed distributed identity architecture will be, bigger than Google is today, if it's done effectively, because all the things you hang off at, once you put payment system in it and all these other things, that's a giant opportunity. And essentially, I just want to see businesses that treat the consumer as the customer, the way Apple does. And I just think there are unlimited opportunities to do that. And hardly anybody is doing it today because the culture is data this, data that. And as Professor Zuboff says, we live in a situation where there's a priesthood of data scientists and AI professionals who are the only people who speak the language. And yet, if you look at the stuff they're producing, particularly the AI guys, it's not that good. In the United States, we have a huge scandal because AI products for police departments perpetuate the bias against people of color. AI products that review resumes are biased against women and people of color. AI products in banking are biased against certain religions and against people of color. So and that just in my mind, that's a huge failure, right? And so I want to see people make AI products that are actually good instead of terrible.
Sounds awesome. A last question: is blockchain the technology to go for?
I don't think so. I would love to believe that blockchain could do some good, but here's the thing: there's an old rule of thumb about technology that if it hasn't made a market impact in 10 years, it probably never will. And blockchain was originally first specified in the 80s. And the first commercial application of it was in the 90s. And Bitcoin is what, 10 years old or something. And I'm looking at this and going, quite obviously, you can create a derivative like Bitcoin and have a trading system. But the technology surrounding it sucks. People lose their coins all over the place. There's a ton of fraud. And they haven't found a second use for it that really matters. And that makes me think that maybe it's just another database architecture. It just happens to be one that's vaguely distributed and vaguely has, the inability to change records. But there are a lot of ways to do it. So if I were doing a startup today, I'd leave a blank space where the blockchain thing is and just find the database architecture that makes it easiest to implement. Because the ideas that people are pursuing with blockchain are generally really, really good ones. But I think that assuming that the blockchain itself is going to make your product competitively advantaged so far isn't working. And this has been going on long enough that I don't know that it ever will. And I would point out that when Facebook created Libra, they call it blockchain, but it's neither distributed nor is it private. Right? I mean, it's basically conspicuous for using names to refer to the exact opposite. Right? But it does have the things that have prevented Bitcoin from being an actual currency, which is to say it's designed to eliminate volatility. I think Bitcoin does a great job of what it was designed to do. And I think blockchain is, if you get rid of the term and just think about distributed database architectures that can't be tampered with, that's a great idea. And making that work has value in a lot of different places, but it's not enough. You gotta have something in there that changes the world, because it's not like there hasn't been enough money thrown at the problem, and it's not like there haven't been a lot of really smart people. They just haven't been able to create anything that really changes the world in a way that's profound. And that's not a criticism of them. There's tons of technology things that don't work out. It's just, I wouldn't hold your breath. I wouldn't base your whole business on it. And I would remember that if you do it Facebook's way, the Libra way, governments should shut you down. Because this notion that you want to be independent of government surveillance and all that kind of stuff runs contrary to the social order we live in today. And I don't think we're going to let that happen without a robust debate. And I think most people today are afraid of the future. They're afraid of change. They're not going to go with blockchain because most people are not beneficiaries. Basically, rich white males. That's who benefits from cryptocurrency, right? And the world's more diverse than that.
Absolutely. So, Roger, thanks a lot for
My
joining
pleasure.
us today.
And the thing is, I am really excited about entrepreneurship throughout Europe, but especially in Austria. And the reason is because your values are different here than they are in America. I think there's
so
a
too.
real chance that you will treat data as a human right. And if you do, you have a chance to make technology empower people in a way that we're blind to in the United States. And this notion that growth is the only thing you should pay attention to, I think is nonsense. Obviously, look around Vienna. I mean, efficiency would never produce the beauty of this city, right? Efficiency would never produce the art of this city or the music of this city. We should rejoice in that, and that's what we should be trying to do with technology. And I hope everybody here does something really great, because that would be exciting.
Roger, thanks a lot for joining us today. Thanks a lot for your insights. We wish you all the best for your book and for your travel through Europe.
Here's the thing. Facebook and Google, they know you're here with me right now.
That's true.
So they probably think you've joined the resistance, so you might as well.
Great. Roger, thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching, and see you next time when we are up with a new guest in our studio. See you.